A loan shark is a person or company who offers loans at extremely high interest rates in an activity also known as predatory lending.
Hello, and welcome to the show, Colourful Conversations with Clergyman Pete and Businessman Mark. This week we debate Payday Lenders. Why is it all going Wonga? Well, payday lender Wonga has finally announced his intention to go into administration after losing his battle to stay afloat. Now, many people have had many issues with Wonga. In fact, this is an organization that at one time, back in 2012, was touted to be exploring a US stock market flotation that would have valued it at more than $1 billion. Extraordinary. So, how has it all gone wrong? What is really the issue here with payday lenders? Is there something about their business model that we just don't like? Many consumers have some big issues, and there's some key cases that we're going to talk about. Well, with me today is Clergyman Pete. So, Clergyman Pete, you have seen today that Wonga is going out of business. What does this mean for financial companies, such as other payday lenders? But what does it also mean to consumers?
Well, businessman Mark, I think that there are two sides there. In terms of what does it mean to other lenders, I mean, it does mean that the business model they were following, very aggressive pursuit of growth to try and become a huge company very quickly, in the end didn't pay off. I mean, it was making profits. I understand it was profitable in its first year, or at the end of the first year, they were able to announce a profit. So it was doing well to start with, but its really aggressive approach in the end didn't work because, of course, it alienated customers or pushed them away because people saw they were just in it to abuse their customers. And, customers have to be valued more highly than that if they're going to stick with a company. So I think that's, not a businessman like yourself, but that's what I take from it, that it was a poor business model. But in terms of what it means to the people who are using it, to the customers, I think this is good. It's a good thing that Wonga isn't there taking advantage of people anymore. But that, of course, doesn't put a stop to other people doing it. But it's good also in that it highlights this, that there are companies there who appear to be offering you something that you need. Well, they are offering you something you need, money, but the cost of it is just far too high.
Well, indeed, let's talk about the business model. Many people will say that, in fact, it's a little bit exploitative. Wonga's model was basically to target people who were perhaps down on their luck. Many people who needed small amounts of money, but, and this was the galling part, had to pay exorbitant rates in return. And in fact, Wonga's slide on the sales score just actually sort of shows you how a business can perhaps go a little bit wrong. They had some unscrupulous methods. In fact, some of the things that they would do was crack down by some of the regulators, the financial regulators, particularly in the United Kingdom, who recognized that they would actually send their customers some false legal documents, basically taking them to court. So it wasn't as though they always stayed on the straight and narrow. In fact, in 2013, their actual turnover was quite high. It was just over £300 million, extraordinary amount of money. But of course, when you're trying to give people money who don't have money, isn't it obvious that perhaps sort of charging them, thousands of percent return, there's no way that they're ever going to pay it back. And in fact, some people perhaps regretted even getting involved with Wonga. They got themselves into such financial difficulty that really there was no way that they could ever get themselves into any form of parity. In fact, they would effectively have to take out another loan to pay the loan. And it got worse. And I think that one of the things that I would like to highlight here is a little quote, in fact, which I think sums it up, which is from Guy Anker. He's the deputy editor of MoneySavingExpert.com. He said, "Payday loans are hideously expensive and morally questionable products, and many have been missold to vulnerable customers. They should only be seen as a loan of absolute last resort." Well, I think that's probably true, and I personally don't like the unscrupulous methods. In fact, Clergyman Pete, we've got a particular view on that, haven't we? In the form of,
Yes, we
well,
have.
let's
We
say the
have.
best way that we know, which I think is a little song, which probably
Of course.
sums up our sentiment. So, listeners, take a listen to this. Why it all went Wonga. La da 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 da. Let's all do the conga to see the end of Wonga. La 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 la. Let's all sing this songa. What they did was wronga. La 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 la. The rates were high and longer, and terms were even stronger. La 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 la. La 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 la. To each payday loan sponger, the stick had a big tonguer. La 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 la. So there you go, Clergyman Pete.
I think we're
That's
onto something
bound to hit
there.
the
Yeah.
top of the charts. As far as I'm concerned,
Yes.
that's a money spinner if ever there was one.
Yes.
Yes,
Yes.
listeners,
Yeah.
if you
Yeah.
want
That's value for money, right
if you
there.
want to
That
see
is.
that go to the top of the charts,
Mind you.
just do let us know.
Yes. Mind you, it is
But
free, so it
Clergyman
would be
Pete,
value for money.
as we
Yeah.
sort of quite tunefully pointed out,
Indeed.
that
Yes.
perhaps some of the Wonga's methods were just a little bit unscrupulous. But they're not the only ones. So although
No.
they're going bust, are we now going to see this queue of these payday lenders? Is that the end of the day for them? Or
Well,
perhaps are we going to still see the exploitation of the consumers?
well, yeah, my point of view on this is as long as as long as there are people out there needing money, you're going to get people trying to take advantage of them. So it's going to continue because even if you were very stringent in your regulation, people can take loans outside of the legal framework. I mean, one of the interesting historical notes about gangsters in the going back to the famous ones in the 20th century, Al Capone's most famous. But the gangsters in early American history of the 20th century was that's what they were. They were basically loan sharks. They would loan you money, and then when you couldn't pay it back, they would use violence to get the money out of you. And they are so similar to the current loan sharks, if you think about it. The violence might not be perpetrated by them. You may say, oh, well, they've got to go to prison. But if you refuse to go to prison, what's going to make you go there? It'll be violence, won't it? So it was under pain of force that you had to pay back because they'd made you a legal loan. So loan sharks were either illegal or legal loaners of money, which where the interest rates were too high. That was basically it. Of course, if the advantage of people not paying back is you can seize some assets, and if you're unscrupulous, you can seize all their assets, of course, and make yourself a tidy package. So that's where the problems come in. But as to whether it's going to go away, I think we can make it harder for these companies to take advantage of people. I think we make it more difficult. But I think people need advice. I mean, once you start looking at interest rates and then compound interest rates, and things start to get complicated. It starts to get difficult to keep a track of how you're going to make your payments on your loan, and then how you're going to have money to spend. As you know, we were talking earlier before we went on air about the Archbishop of Canterbury, Justin Welby's little spat with his complaints about Wonga themselves. Well, he's the patron of a pretty good charity called CAP, or Christians Against Poverty, who offer advice, and they also are able to help you consolidate your loans, put all the loans that you have into one, and also help you by actually doing your budgeting for you, with you, coaching you through how to organise paying off loans, and hopefully not need them in future, or at least have proper regulated ones. In the first instance, organised through Christians Against Poverty, or another smaller, not a bank, but some sort of credit union. Often they operate in a better way. In fact, pretty much all local credit unions would be a better option than going to some sort of loan shark. Go for a group of people that you know, who have personal capital. They have a reason for keeping faith with you. But anyway, yes, Christians Against Poverty We'll put a link in the show notes to them, because if people listening to this are having difficulties with debt, which many people are, you don't need to be ashamed of it. We can have problems in different areas. This is quite a common area where people run into problems. Get in touch with CAP. They're there to help, and I recommend them because of their Christian, prayerful approach, and also because of their professional approach. They've been doing this since '96 and have been able to develop good relationships with banks and other big companies to restructure your loan, to help by them negotiating for you.
Yes.
But in terms of them stopping, in terms of people like Wonga just being just coming to a total end, there's going to be no more of these loan sharks. I can't see that's ever going to happen.
Well, in my opinion, I think you agree. I agree with you. I think one of the issues here, and I want to sort of get into the ease at which it was to deal with them, and maybe this is actually where perhaps governments can help, and certainly financial institutes can help, because Wonga never considered itself, ironically, to be a payday lender. They preferred instead to describe themselves as a maverick technology company that happened to sell loans, meaning that those who wanted to borrow money could do so at the slide of a thumb, just simply from their phone. It was that easy. The simpler it was to get the money, there it was, they could hook up their customers. And in some ways, when you know that you're in desperate need of financial help, perhaps there are other ways to do it. You're quite right that whether you go to CAP or whether you go to the Citizens Vice Bureau or anyone else, a notable authority that can guide you, because it's quite easy to take out these loans, as was proven, but it's so easy to get yourself into further debt. So maybe there is another angle here in which we should pursue, which is about the ease at which it is to get the money. It's interesting about the technology, because whether it's online, whether it's at the touch of a button on your mobile, perhaps that's something that could be cracked down a little bit. So I just wonder here that it's just, do you think it's, and I'm thinking this from a moral standpoint, well, many customers have argued that Wonga's practices were very much about exploiting those who were in need. And I know that you could argue, well, isn't that the same for a bank that might be, say, giving you a loan somewhere? Well, the difference being was, of course, the interest rates. Now, I know that had been addressed to a certain extent, but still the rates are very, very high. And should we try and impose greater regulation on these type of organizations? Or should we just say, look, we don't need them? Maybe there's another way of handling people who get themselves into debt.
Yes, I think that there is another way. I think, as I was talking about earlier, I think local groups of people, when you get large enough, you tend to call it a credit union, but you can have a sort of investment club where you pool your money. The local solution, I think, is better here. Of course, if you're in a poor area where there's no one with enough money to lend you, that would be difficult to start with. But once there's money in there, this is where you could have businesses or banks, getting involved, or you could simply have, if you have enough people clubbing together, you'd still be able to do it. You need enough of a pot of money in order to make it viable. So I think that there are other ways, and that they've been proven. And across Britain, there are many. I don't know the precise number, but I know that there are many credit unions, and it's just a question of having people knowing what they're doing, setting it up, and people offer to train you, and it's one of the things CAP could help with. But there are other charities as well, and you can get advice from Citizens Vice Bureau and other people like that. They will point you in the right direction. You can set these things up. But in terms of regulation, I think, as regular listeners will know, I think that the whole of the way we structure society needs changing to fit in with what the Bible teaches. And the Bible has such a lot to say about money. I mean, it's often been pointed out that although people talk about love being very important in the Bible as a theme, that's good, but there are more verses talking about money. I mean, money, the use of money.
And people don't think about that, do they?
No, because it's a very practical book. Whether or not you are a believing Christian, what you can do is see that the Bible was used as as the Bible, the source book. We often use that as a phrase. Don't we? It's the Bible for something. It uses the source book for economics. I mean, Adam Smith, who was the father of capitalism, uh, he talked about how you should organize in free trade between countries, and he used the Bible as his source book to talk about how to organize free trade. And now, the Bible as a source book in that area is good. How about loans? Well, in terms of any loans that you give, it was in biblical times, usury was banned. So you weren't allowed to you wouldn't have this sort of compound interest that we have today. You'd pay something or you could pay a fee. But even if you did that, it came to an end every 7 years. Debts had to be, you had to forgive them if it was still going then. So what that did is it had a reset every 7 years, and then a massive reset after a longer period. And so if you have that period of reset, you make it temporary. What it means is that for such companies, they can make a bit of money by loaning, but they can't make exorbitant funds,
Yes.
and they're going to lose out
That's the
pretty
bit that's a
swiftly.
bit of an unknown. What is deemed to be exorbitant? And
Indeed,
that's the
yeah,
thing
yeah,
that I think
yeah,
needs
yeah,
to be defined, isn't
yeah,
it?
yeah. Well, it does need to be defined, and I think that we can work not at the actual amounts, but I think we can come up with the Mark and Pete method for defining it, and an exorbitant amount would be defined in terms of its effect. So it's not the exact amount of money; it's what effect does that have on the people you're lending to. So
Yes.
if the people you're lending to, and you could just look at the results, look at what happens to them after the loan. If it ends up with them being poor, or a greater percentage of them defaulting on the loan, too great a percentage, that's to be defined. Then you could say, this is exorbitant. You're making too much money because the people you're lending to are getting poorer, or
Yes.
can't default on the loan. So I think that's a start anyway of how to work at and come to a proper definition of what it would mean to be exorbitant.
Well, yes, exactly. And it's interesting that for one point of clarification here, for those customers who perhaps have taken out loans with Wonga, don't think that the problem has gone away.
No.
In fact, the city regulator, the Financial Conduct Authority, FCA, said the FCA will continue to supervise Wonga when it's gone into administration and will be in close contact with proposed administrators. Customers should continue to make any outstanding payments in the normal way. All existing agreements remain in place and will not be affected by the proposed administration. So, however, the firm is no longer able to issue new loans. But the point being is that if you owe, you still have to pay. So it doesn't go
Yes,
away
exactly.
from that
Yeah.
point of view.
Mm.
So I think in some ways, are people really fully aware of the implications when they take out such loans? Whatever the rate happens to be, and I do agree that certainly some form of means testing needs to be done. If you take out a loan of say £500, which is a reasonable amount of money, if you have to pay back two and a half, £3,000, is that going to jeopardize your situation? Is that going to put you in a worse situation where you just cannot trade out? And that's the key here. Now, many people who have complained about Wonga have said that, well, for example, there have been students who have needed to take out these sort of loans simply to pay their debts. So again, it's people in desperation, and that's the thing that I am concerned about here is whether there are certain types of people who can only take out loans. Because somebody like a student who clearly perhaps wouldn't necessarily have got a good track record in business, they wouldn't have had time to have lots of savings. Should we actually say, well, actually, you can't take out loans when you're of a certain standing, because otherwise you're just going to pile yourself with more debts. I mean, students already have debts from their courses.
Yeah.
Where do you draw the line on
Yeah.
this?
Yeah. I mean, that's the question of student loans. Is complicated by the government's involvement, of course, in their insisting on there being a separate student loan scheme, with delayed payment and all the complications of that. My opinion, I guess this could be the Mark and Pete opinion. Let's say is that when you take out loans, it should be a business transaction, and
Exactly.
you should be able to show that you can pay it back, and if you can't, you can't have it. And I think that would mean people argue. Well, there's an argument for the students having loan because they need the education in order to be able to progress. But I think that's a mistake, and that's come from political decision, a populist decision to get more people into higher education. The government couldn't afford it, and therefore you have this loan system being put in. That should never have been the issue.
Mm.
And if there were only a small number of students going into higher education, those who are going to benefit from it, you would have loans becoming available from companies who are going to give competitive rates because they were expected. If it's expected to get money back, if it's just the top few percent going into higher education, you're going to want to loan to them. They're going to be making money later in life. So I think it's a problem that's been brought about by too much government interference. Well, put it another way, politicians seeking re-election interference, and that's what's happened there. That's a particular case. But I don't know whether you agree with this, Mark. As a businessman, I would have thought a loan is really a business transaction.
It
Let's
is.
just treat it like that.
Well, indeed, and listeners, Wonga, at the height of their success in 2013, had 1 million customers. Maybe you were one of them. What do you think about this situation? Do you still owe money to this organization, or maybe to other payday lenders? Well, why not let us know your thoughts? Log on to markandpete.com and tell us your story. We'd love to hear from you. Well, this is a contentious subject. More will unfold as Wonga's fortunes or misfortunes will come to a conclusion, I'm sure, depending on what the administrators can and cannot do. But nevertheless, we want you to think very carefully the next time you need money. Make sure you go to a reputable firm. So join us again next time for more colourful conversations with Clergyman Pete and Businessman Mark.